Okay. Call the meeting to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we do the roll call, I'm just going to mention that Mayor Bruder is running a few minutes, well, it might be more than a few minutes late. She had a medical emergency she had to deal with, and she'll be here hopefully as soon as possible. I'll let you do the roll call.
Councilmember Yaffe.
Here.
Councilmember Tricoci. Here. Councilmember Salver.
Here.
Councilmember Reed. Here. Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Vice Mayor Fuller.
Here.
Mayor Bruder will be in shortly. With P&Z, Board Member Sklar. It's not in yet. Board Member Saland.
Yes.
Board Member Keane.
Here.
Board Member Frankel is out. Board Member Bebchik.
Here.
Vice Chair Vdakovich.
Here.
Chair Hurwitz.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we start, I'm just going to mention, first of all, we appreciate you guys all coming in today. We've been trying to schedule this for quite a while, and we do appreciate your time. Also, because of the strange setup, there's a microphone that's the handheld microphone. If you would all please use it, we need to obviously keep the record on there, so as you speak, if you need to pass that around, we'd appreciate it. Okay, let's go to number one.
Discussion and direction requested by the Town Council and the Planning and Zoning Board regarding possible code amendments in the single-family district. You have a memorandum from Mike Miller and some information in the white paper.
I think the best thing to start with is if Chairman Hurwitz would actually just give us a little breakdown, please, as far as your initial suggestions, and then we can go into the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Is this working? All good? Okay. Thanks for having us. Appreciate the opportunity. There's a memo in here and a bunch of other information that hopefully everyone has a chance to take a look at. But long story short, maybe just take a second and sort of give, I think, our collective sort of interpretation of the assignment. We talked last time I was here, but we weren't all here together. But in that memo, summary is that the Commission had some concerns, I believe, about large blocky homes and referred that to Planning and Zoning. We've spent, I think, 4 meetings on it, a lot of debate. What came out of the first or second meeting, I believe, were a few things, call them low-hanging fruit, if you will, that everyone really had some consensus on. Those things were referred back to the council, which was changes to landscaping in the front of the house, and secondly, adding a requirement for embellishments, if you will, on long runs of concrete, which synonymously not in favor or against any specific type of architecture, but typically found on some of the larger modern homes that have been built in the community. So those were the things I think that everybody, I believe, if I'm correct, scream at me or kick me if I'm wrong, we had consensus on. And there was exhaustive debate on the rest of it, which was whether or not we wanted to make recommendations relative to the size of homes. And if you did want to do that, the methodologies that would be available that are typically done, have been done in other communities, and whether or not we could build some consensus on that. At the last meeting, and those opportunities include the size of homes, literally square footage limitations. We didn't talk much about, I think, changing any of the setbacks in the town. I think everybody was comfortable with those. They did include both lot coverage and building coverage, 2 separate concepts. And then also was discussed was requiring the size of 2-story homes to be incongruous with the first and second floors. And again, really mostly trying to contemplate whether or not the town, the council, wanted to go that step further and instruct us to develop a more finite recommendation on limiting the size of homes or not. So I think we can talk through all of those methodologies. The council or the planning and zoning can express, their individual opinions as well. But we definitely varied on whether or not we wanted to limit the size of homes for the purpose of limiting the size of homes, I think is really the debate, or whether or not we wanted to potentially, if any additional recommendations were requested of us, whether we wanted to make recommendations that really endorsed and supported good architecture. I think some of us believe that both of those things may end up with the same result, but there's definitely a different, I think, theoretical approach. So, long story short, at our last meeting, what we really came back with was a discussion with the council and really a question to ask the council to discuss and debate and sort of decide whether or not the two recommendations that were made were sufficient, or whether or not the council had a consensus that you wanted us to specifically limit the size of homes in the town. And if that were the case, we could discuss here and or go and sort of fight out how you do that. And there really are 3 or 4 methodologies to do that. But we really didn't know if that was something ultimately the council wanted to vote on, so we didn't get to fighting that out.
No, I think you're right on target, and I think the key thing, and to begin, or any part of the conversation, and again, I appreciate what you just ran through with us, is we're here to try and provide at least some bit of an idea of guidance of what we're asking you guys to give us your evaluation upon. And to that end, the first question I think does become, are we looking to limit the size of homes? And if we can hit that one first and make that determination, then we can go on to the second parts.
Okay.
So as far as discussion,
Yes,
yes, you want to limit, or yes, you want to discuss?
yes, I want to
Okay.
limit the size, I think we need to limit the size of homes. I'm not, I don't think anything is sacred. I think in the past 5 or 10 years, there have been some single-family development that is just out of scale. I'm not sure what the exact terminology is. I know that we use terminology on the East Island, like density and intensity. I don't think density it comes into play here because it's a single-family home, but certainly like the intensity of some of the developments just seem just overwhelming for the size of the lot and overwhelming to the side neighbors and the front neighbors. And I mean, there's one just such an egregious one that just happens to be across the street from Stephanie's house. Which is just, it looks like, honestly, the front of this large structure looks like the rear of a large structure.
Looks like a parking garage.
Yeah, it looks like the rear of a large structure. So, I mean, I think, we definitely have to, I think size is definitely on the table to discuss. I know that we had some discussion about, the footprint of the home, lot coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So I think nothing is not on the table as far as I'm concerned.
Let me start down here. Elizabeth, your view on as far as
I think
size
that
goes.
there's a couple of things that I made. Number one is I know that the suggestion that you guys had given was to include the pervious pavers in the calculation. I don't want to include them in the calculation. I think that, it's a separate item for me personally. I do want to look at the lot coverage and the setbacks. Some of the homes that are being built feel very close to the street. And I know that right now they're within code, and I think in the last update, there actually was an amendment to the actual setbacks that you guys had provided, or it was just reiterated. Okay, thank you, Mr. Gakovich. I'm going to say that right one day. But I do want to look at the setbacks, and I do want to look at the lot coverage that we have as well. The other thing, last thing, sorry, Kelly, is landscaping. I know we had talked about the number of trees. I think that increasing the number of trees is something else that I'm very interested in seeing.
Kelly?
Okay, so this is just the question that you asked of should we limit the size of homes? I'm going to say it once and then I won't say it anymore throughout the meeting. I wish we could have this conversation about the East Island as well. And, we've had a lot of people over the years come and complain about the density, intensity, and setbacks and other things, and we made some changes on the East Island. And other than maybe Mrs. Newhut occasionally speaking about the single-family homes, we get very little public comment about it. But nevertheless, here we are. I'm in favor of smart development, lots of green space, not encroaching onto your neighbors. I think we need to assume that maybe not everyone will change their home. There's some beautiful architecture from the 50s, 60s, and 70s that are very well maintained still over there. And I hate to see when the existing homes are sort of, just cast into the shadows. I think that there should be a harmony and a respect of the existing homes. So if that means that we have to somehow limit the size of them, I still think that some of the homes that have been respectfully done, and it depends if, what the lot size is. Some of them seem to be in harmony with the existing homes, and then of course we all know the ones, that seem to be a little larger. I went to at least 3 of the planning and zoning meetings, and I heard the discussion about regulating the lot coverage and the building coverage, and it made sense to me. So, long answer, yes, I would be if, it seems to me like the homes could still be viable, and I look for you as experts, especially the architects, to guide with how to do that responsibly. Thank you.
Jordan?
Yeah, all right. This is a very difficult answer for a very simple question. I would say at this point, everything's on the table to look at. I'm not necessarily against anything, but I want to be sensitive to the rights of the property owners. If somebody comes to Bay Harbor, just like any other city, I believe to some extent limited government. I think the focus that what I'm looking for is I want to get as much as possible done while respecting not only their rights and also allow the creativity of whoever the architect may be, but also keep in mind what Councilmember Reed said, some level of sensitivity to the neighbor. Bay Harbor has this hodgepodge of homes. You have a modern style, and then you have these other more traditional styles. And somehow or another, we all have to live together. So the question is, how do you make it happen? When you look at the numbers, the question is how, some of the meetings we've had, they said, well, how did this house ever get built? How did this ever happen? Well, is it the house that was off? Is it that it's so prominent because it lacks the landscaping? So I want to have a real open and honest conversation, because I'm not coming here with any specific thing saying I think we need to do A or B. I'm looking to the Planning and Zoning Board for your expertise, your professional expertise, as to telling us and advising us as to how best to manage not just the growth, but really the future for the West Island. I don't necessarily say we need to increase this or we need to limit that. I'd like to get ideas as to how we can make everyone kind of live more cohesively. I think the house that was mentioned previously, and it's going to come up again today, one of the main issues was, again, that lack of landscaping. Well, is it that the house was so large, or is it that you can see it more prominently? What Councilmember Salver said in regards to some of these homes, is it that the setbacks are limited? How can that be where the house is so close to the neighbor or so prominently seen from the street? When you look at the numbers and you look at the setbacks, it seems as though our numbers are actually more restrictive than some of our other cities. When you think about it, Bay Harbor requires 25 feet for a front setback. That's more than what Miami Beach requires for a house of a minimum of 30,000 square feet, or 30,000 lot size. I want to get those ideas and have that conversation. Thanks.
I'm sure the concerns of my colleagues. as far as I'm concerned, lot size, lot coverage, the maximum size of the house, landscaping issues are important, the effect on the neighboring properties. Every day I drive back and forth and I look at the house that's going up at, I don't know, there's 9530, 9540, West Broadview Drive. We all see it right by the bridge. Obviously, that's within code, I'm assuming, but it seems to me that that house is very close to the street. And to me, it looks massive. Now, it may end up being a beautiful house. But that's the type of house where I see that it's going to have an impact on neighbors. It has an impact on, I think the entire community. Obviously because of the, the location. But to me, that's the type of house that just seems a bit massive for the lot that it's on. And those are the types of homes that have attracted my attention, perhaps in somewhat of a negative sense over the last couple of years. I think landscaping is important as well. Not just the number of trees, but maybe the placement of trees or landscaping to try to, soften or ameliorate the effect of, some of the large, blank walls and so forth, particularly in the front. That's pretty much it. I'd like to see something, that we take action, or that all of us take action that would, take into account, the neighboring properties as well, because, as maybe Kelly and Elizabeth said, a lot of these older houses are not going anywhere anytime soon, I don't think. And some of them are just, looming over the neighboring properties, and, so maybe that's a setback issue. I don't know. I tend to agree with my colleagues, except I will make a statement regarding private rights. I do believe we have to protect the individual property rights of the individual owners. I'm not for the idea of restricting what someone can, for the most part, build on their property. If someone buys with the idea of being able to build something, they should be able to build. However, the neighbor has to be thought of within that design. And I think that's what we're all kind of going towards, is that anything that becomes a massive structure, whether it be, if it's one story and it's taking over too much of the land, it's not as, let's just say, it's not going to be taking over that much of the viewpoint. But when you go to a second story, and now you're towering over the neighbor, well, now you've got that second consideration. And I think that's what we have to approach. Whether there's an approach where we can use where the setback starts a little different for the second story without trying to mandate the wedding cake design, but allowing for an architect to design as they need, that may be a possibility. But we're looking for your guidance on how to do it so that it doesn't impose on the rights of the neighbor, while at the same time not imposing on the rights of the individual property owner. So I guess the question at this point is going to go back to you for suggestions in your expertise as to how we can accomplish that, or at least try to accomplish that.
Before we answer that question, I would like to say that in my view this is a perfect example of doing an overcorrection of something that might not be an issue. A few years ago we had a lot of spec developers that came into town. They bought property at low values and they wanted to maximize square footage. There are some few bad examples that you can point out. Few houses that are massive, few houses without a front landscaping. I think it's only, you can count them with your hand. And because of those few examples, I think we might be trying to overcorrect and over-limit restrictions that I don't think apply. I think we should protect property owners of if what they want to build in the house within the code. That's why we have a code. And I think we might be trying to just overcompensate of something that might not be broken. That's my view. And then if there was issues in the West Island with building like a dog park or like a little park, I don't want to imagine what's going to happen if people on the West Island hear that somebody's trying to limit the size of the houses. So I'm more on the no camp of the equation. I think what we have today works, and we might be trying to overcorrect and overcompensate for a few bad examples.
Once again, I feel like Alan does. I've been against these restrictions from the beginning. And once again, you know what? Bay Harbor is transitioning. 15 years from now, you're probably not going to see any original one-story 1950s homes. Those homes are 60 years old. They've outlived their useful lives. the island is changing. Property values have gone up tremendously, where dry vacant lots are selling in excess of $1 million. I would not want to be a person that's thinking about devaluing one of my neighbor's properties by having these restrictions put on it. Now, yes, it does seem when I live on a street of all two-story homes, and I'm on West Broadview, I don't notice them. Everybody's the same. There's a couple of one-stories left. They're not going to be there for long. I'm sure they're going to be torn down within the next 2 years, and they're going to be the same. I would want to think about, you know what, when a neighborhood is changing as dramatically as Bay Harbor, and you have property values going up, you also have your tax values going up. So for having people to have some incentive to sell their smaller homes, when these new homes come in, the property taxes are going to be tenfold what people are currently paying. And I used to live in Keystone Point, and I lived there for 30 plus years. And that neighborhood, value-wise, was a total flatline for 30 years. We sold a few years ago, we moved out. Now you see the same thing. There's two-story, some modern, some Mediterranean, different styles, popping up all over the place. There must be 30, 40 new homes under construction. Neighborhood's changing, values are going up. Once again, you have these outdated 1950s small 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes that aren't fitting the family profile that's moving to Bay Harbor today. So I think we're trying to fix something that's not broke. I think people are taking that house everybody's talking about, it's a few down for me. Not my favorite, but you know what? Architecture, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I like a modern home. Some people like a Mediterranean home. If somebody wants to build a Mediterranean house next to my house, I'm for it, as long as it's good architecture. There's trying to put restrictions on, too many restrictions on too many people. I don't think the stakeholders, homeowners of Bay Harbor are really going to want that. And I'm sure in 10, 15 years, you're not going to see an original house left in Bay Harbor. Good, bad, indifferent, I don't know. You know what? The horse is out of the gate, that's what's going on. And, that's where this town's turning. And I think we kind of embrace it, watch it, use these increased tax dollars to continue to beautify the island, the landscaping, public things. Me personally, I'd love to see the power lines put underground. I mean, with the tax revenue that's going to be generated, it's a different ballgame. So that's my feeling.
Well, hello. I'm new on the board, so for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Wesley Keene. I'm a practicing architect.
It means it's all your fault.
Yeah, I take full responsibility. Actually, that's a good segue, though, because I think it sounds like to that simply a complicated question, that we couldn't get necessarily a simple answer. And I think the reason for that is because, everybody has different opinions and different viewpoints. What is loud and clear, though, however, is our responsibility on this side of the table in terms of reviewing these projects and really making sure that we're looking at these things. So the code is sort of the minimum, but I think we're the sort of last stop, other than staff and the building department, to make sure that this stuff really is unified with the community and of the scale of the community. So, as a new member, that's definitely something I hear loud and clear from that side of the table. And as I move forward, personally on the board, I'll make sure to take that responsibility very seriously when looking at projects for review. Having said that, I think that a good zoning code is a balance between, sort of good restrictions, but also flexibility and promotion for good architecture. As a practicing architect, I can tell you that a lot of times these challenges generate better architecture in a way. I mean, we sort of throw our hands up at them sometimes, but they actually create us to think a little bit more, to look at those areas of the community that we're all talking about, because without them, we wouldn't even turn to it. We would just sort of follow the program of the owner or the developer. So I do think that perhaps we could insert a few, language, so to speak, to allow for that flexibility and freedom of the design team and to the ownership, while at the same time not tying the hands behind that same team. So, we can go into what those specifics are. We, as a board, some of the members took time to actually generate documents in terms of what those look like. Michael Miller did a great job, as you guys see here, looking at other cities. The one that I don't think is on here is Golden Beach, but, oh, it is here? But I think Golden Beach is also a good example, who's also going through a bit of a renaissance in their town and adopting new language in their code. So, usually these things are a reaction to spec buildings, which these are developers who want to build, maximize bottom line, and then get out. And so I think those are the kind of projects that we need to be wary of. I personally feel, and I haven't been on the board long enough to really say this with confidence, but I do feel that a private end user homeowner wants to do the right thing for the community because it's the community they're going to live in. So, my view is I'm sort of medium temperature on this issue in terms of I do feel that we could do some things to the code that could improve it while still giving flexibility to the designer. So I'm happy to discuss that. And then just in closing, I tend to agree with Kelly also that we're looking at the West Island, but just in the few projects that I've seen come through, I think the East Island also needs looking at in terms of what's going on over there. I'm not sure why we're focusing solely on the West Island, but my personal opinion is that we're seeing a lot of great architecture. We're seeing it go away for substandard architecture, quite honestly. So again, going back to my personal responsibility, I'm personally going to do everything I can to not allow that happen. But it would be great to kind of equalize the focus on both islands because it is one unified community. And then the final thing is, we're talking about things that are normal things to talk about during a renaissance of any city. But one thing that we're not talking about is sea level rise and the risks we face in terms of that. So we're talking about these homes that are built in the 40s and 50s, and their sort of their first floor level in relation to sea level and FEMA. Well, FEMA's updating their maps as we speak, and some cities, I know Golden Beach and Miami Beach and others, I think even Bell Harbor, are now requiring the finished floor to be set at 1 foot above base flood elevation. That's sort of a ship or a boat that we don't want to miss with this renaissance that's happening now because it might be too late. So if we could, not to further complicate the issue, but if we could also throw in the mix this idea of looking at sea level rise and the risks that the community face. Councilmember Elizabeth, you mentioned the idea of pervious pavers. Whether we want to credit that or not, I think the main focus there of that suggestion was that if we don't promote more pervious area in our lots, that means that groundwater is going to be discharged into our public infrastructure system. And then we have to deal with it as a city. So these kind of subtleties that we can introduce in the code that promote, not only good community, but good resiliency, I think is important. So thank you. And thank you guys, because it's actually the Planning and Zoning Board hearing night, and I know that you guys are here on our behalf for this workshop, so thank you for that also.
Josh, before we go on, Jerry, let me indulge me for 1 second. First, there's a couple of things that Mr. Salon said that I would like to just discuss briefly before we go on. If I'm not mistaken, the intent of this meeting is design and planning and zoning matters, not finance matters. So I think it would be best really to limit our comments to what we're talking about here, which is planning and zoning, the building code, and not finance. The second thing is that I want to ask the attorney a question regarding any changes in the building regulations. We are perfectly within our legal rights as a council to change the building regulations if we think it is required. Is that not correct?
Correct. Technically, you're changing zoning and the building upon that. You have every right to do it. As a matter of fact, all the law says that the municipalities have no greater discretion than in their building within their municipality, including their zoning.
Okay, and the last thing that I wanted to mention is that, Wesley, regarding your comments about the East Island, this meeting happens to be about the West Island, but certainly, my personal opinion is that, I would be very happy to sit here and re-examine the building regulations on the East Island as well, specifically as it relates to single lots, single lot developments. So I mean, I have a lot of comments on single lot developments on the East Island, but again, we're talking about the West Island, we're talking about the zoning codes.
Right, I think you're going to find that everybody here agrees, and I would assume that it's time to look at the East Island as well. We're doing it in piecemeal, so we'll do the West now, and we'll do the East afterwards, but I think that is something that's on the agenda.
I had a question. Wesley, you mentioned the BFE +1. I thought that's in the new Florida Building Code. Is that not correct?
That is correct. In fact, it's a question for staff, but I don't know if that's something that, I see in other cities not really adopting it or recognizing it yet. I don't know if we are yet.
I mean, it's Florida Building Code. We're required
Yes,
to...
we're required to at least do.
Okay, so I just want to make it clear that we have to have BFE +1.
Well, on that same note, if you all believe that we should be going above and beyond that, that's a conversation as well that should be included tonight. I mean, I'm not talking about building it 5 feet up, but if you think we should be going a little bit higher or something, please obviously include it.
Yeah, and sorry, just to respond to that, it's a tough measure because, again, we're talking about existing neighbors and we don't want to dwarf their homes either, so it's
we don't want
something
the
that
water
has to
flooding into them as well.
Yeah,
That's the other issue.
exactly. So it's something that definitely has to be studied, but absolutely, it would be great if we can add that to the discussion.
Is it Jerry? You were up next.
Jerry, before you, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to mention, in terms of talking about restrictions of property rights, which of course I support property rights, but I know years ago we talked about the difference between dry lots and the waterfront lots. We also talked, there are different building height, regulations with respect to the dry lots and the waterfront lots. We also had years ago talking about, could we have 3-story houses? And there was a whole long discussion about, keeping it at 2 stories. And so, there are regulations which, the town has adopted over the years, which, councils at the time believe were reasonable in view of, our community and in the size of homes and building heights and numbers of stories and so forth, which I don't think, substantially infringed upon the rights of the property owners at the time. So I don't think that the discussion we're having would necessarily infringe upon the rights of property owners. Because otherwise, you can let people build anything that they want to do. I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Just talking about the sea level rise, another issue that I think that should be considered, and I know some communities are doing it on waterfront properties. They're forcing the seawall height, increasing the seawall height, and I think just doing raising the finished floor of the home is just one part of it. I think we should really be considering or looking at requiring developers of single-family homes on the multifamily side of the East Island as well, of increasing their seawall. It's not going to work all that great because you're going to be going, it's up and down, but it has to start. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. Having the homes 1 foot above and the streets full, underwater, it's not going to solve anything. So. Regarding this issue, I'm sure most of you have heard my opinion on it. I've been a strong advocate of limiting the size of homes, lot coverage, building size. I brought it up 2 years ago when we started to see some homes that were brought up during our planning and zoning meeting. When we started to see some homes that were what I thought too big for the lots. I don't know, truthfully, I don't think I've seen any on the waterfront lots because those are obviously larger lots that, in my opinion, seem too large. The ones I've seen are on the dry lots. I think we have to look at it in general. I think the restrictions are based on the percentage of the lot size, like all the communities do. The infringing on property rights or the owners, property owners, I don't think is really, it should be an issue because all the communities have recently adopted some of these tougher restrictions. The list that Michael provided, like Wesley said, you've got Golden Beach is not on here, but they also have restrictions on the lot coverage. They don't necessarily have restrictions on building size, but they have it on lot coverage based on what's on impervious versus pervious. What's green, what's driveway, house, pool deck, all counts as impervious. They also have restrictions on the size of, or the setbacks, if you will, of the second floors, as do some of the other communities. Miami Beach, by the way, the setback is, the front setback is 20 foot, but if it's a two-story, it's 30 foot. So some of these are not quite accurate. Actually, Miami Beach, the restriction, the lot coverage and building size here were recently modified. It's actually 50% on building size and 30% on lot coverage. They also restrict how long of a side of a building could be if it's two-story along the side yard. And if it's over a certain percentage of the depth of the lot or a certain maximum number of feet, you have to set back on both levels and create sort of a recess, a garden area, if you will, for a certain distance, a certain percentage of the lot, a minimum depth off the required setback. I had done also similar analysis of the zoning of areas or municipalities in this area. One of the ones that's not on Michael's list is Sunny Isles, also has restrictions on lot size, on lot coverage of 42% and building size of 60%. So all these communities have, whether it was recently or years past, have made these changes to their code. I think it's something that we definitely need to do. I don't think it's going to negatively affect, it certainly hasn't affected values. I know you don't want to necessarily speak about that, but it hasn't affected values in Miami Beach or in Golden Beach or any of the Val Harbor, any of the Surfside. The values are going up, and it's a matter of, if you're this close to the water, that's what the value is. And it's not, the value is not because they can build a 7,000 square foot home. It's because of where we are.
Finishes and the construction, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the value is.
Right. I had proposed that we limit lot coverage to 35% on the building size, and up to 40% if you include things like gazebos, covered terraces that appear open, including that up to 40%. And a maximum building size, a maximum interior building size of 60% of your lot. Those are in line or more generous than most of the municipalities that we're comparing to.
Right now, we have none. We have none.
And a house right now, it's restricted simply by setbacks. And a house right now, I always use a standard interior lot, which is about 10,000 square feet.
Which is smaller than most other municipalities, though.
Not
for the most part, on the chart that we've seen, they've been smaller.
Yeah, I mean, there's
the interior.
Standard lots in the city of Miami Beach can go from 60 foot wide. You can do it. There's 75 by 100 is what's typically in Sunny Isles. 75 by 100 is a pretty standard lot. So there's some smaller, but if you do it as a percentage, you're not saying a square footage. So it doesn't matter the size of the lot necessarily. I think there should also be, I think we should look at our setbacks as well. I think certainly our rear setback is too small, should be greater. If you build a two-story home, and you can build it at 15 foot, it's in my opinion, too imposing on someone's rear yard, the area that they use for recreation. I also think that we should be looking at, like Miami Beach does, is the length of a two-story home on the setback line. I think 10 foot is probably fine, but if it's too long of a length of a wall, it should be required to set back. I don't personally believe that we should, like some other municipalities, force a second floor to step back. Actually, like we do on the East Island, as you go up, you're forced to step back and create this wedding cake concept or idea. I don't like it because it restricts what you can do. I think if we are clear on building size and lot coverage, then it's going to force the homes to be smaller. That doesn't mean that on one side someone may build a two-story wall off the setback line, but in general, it's gonna help. I mean, there's a house that's under construction now, which to me is probably the most offensive, that's under construction on 97th Street. And I don't know why we approved it. I could say I didn't approve it, I voted against it. I don't think we should have approved it. That house is 7,400 square feet, AC space, on a 10,000 square foot lot. Actually, it's a little bit over 10,000. That's too big. You can see it from any side you look at, front, side, even you can actually see it from Kane Concourse because the lot behind is empty. It's too big, and it doesn't promote a good community. Eventually, if all these homes do this, and knock down the one-story homes and build the bigger homes, then we're not going to like the community that we're living in. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be looked at aggressively.
Mr. Gadkovich,
Yep.
some of the items that you spoke about, you said that the rear setback is too small. What is your suggestion on the rear setback?
I think at minimum it should be 20 feet. I also think and naturally, most of the homes, what I was about to say is that if you are at your setback line, you shouldn't be allowed on the rear to build the entire length of that setback. Maybe a maximum length, and then you step back further would be a good solution. But I think if you have some of these restrictions in terms of lot coverage and building size, naturally that's going to happen. It's going to happen always because someone's going to put a pool, want a backyard. The only time that it won't happen is if you have sort of a courtyard type design. But I think as you, I think 15 is too small. It should be at least 20 feet, and maybe look at other restrictions depending on how much of the rear yard that setback line you're going to build to.
Excuse me, do you mean 20 feet even if it's one story?
Even one story.
Or only,
Yeah.
okay, even on one story.
Even one story. By the way, in my opinion, the lot coverage, building size should not apply to one-story homes. I think that we should increase the setback to 20 foot in the rear, but if you're building a one-story home up to a certain height, maximum height, the lot coverage building size shouldn't apply. If you want to build out, like you said, if you want to build out, 5,000 square feet or 5,500 square feet to your setback lines, but you're only doing one story, it's not imposing on the community.
So if it's one story, it doesn't...
My opinion, you wouldn't restrict it other than by setbacks.
So then, how do you feel about the current setbacks that we have, apart from the rear setback that we just talked about?
I think in general, they're fine.
As long as it's one story?
No, even on the two-story. Where I would look at is how much of a second story you can build, how long of a second story you can build on the setback lines at the front, at the sides and the rear.
But you don't like the wedding cake. You're not in favor so much of the wedding cake. You don't mind it being...
Well, he's saying, I think what he's saying is not to force...
Right, if an architect chooses to design that way, then that's fine.
But not limit that
Not to force them to do a wedding, okay.
I can maybe try to, I guess that's my job, right, to try to
Thank you, sir.
synthesize at least our board's, thoughts. As you've heard, that our opinions run the gamut. I don't think we have 7 different discrete opinions, but surely we don't have consensus. That said, one of the number one takeaways, and I've mentioned this a couple times, I don't mean to be repetitive, but I feel strongly about it, is that this is an organic sort of living and breathing process. And as the community does grow, we're seeing some growing pains. I understand where my colleagues say we don't want to overcorrect, but I think one of the greatest takeaways, and it's not necessarily going to be something that we need to legislate about, but I feel strongly about it, is that this conversation has emboldened the board to look at things with a finer lens. When you talk about what's going on with the house next door, we're not going to spot zone and legislate according to what Jerry's house looks like when I'm building mine. But surely, there could be more discretion on the board with regard to looking at the site plan and looking at the as-built conditions next to you. You can't legislate about that, but you can surely be more sensitive to it as a board. So a lot of it is, there are a few examples, I think, of houses that are offensive to some, maybe most. And just having this discussion, I think, makes the process stronger and makes us look at things a little bit differently, a little bit more closely. As any board or any professional, you kind of learn, and as a board, as we function together, we're learning to dance better together and work stronger together to protect the community. So I think that's a takeaway with nothing done. With regard to the other side of the spectrum, which is closer to Jerry's position, I think what we wanted to come here tonight to hear was how the council felt about considering things that are going to limit the size of homes. And I think you guys were very clear that nothing is off the table and you'd like to see some recommendations. So if we were going in that direction, you clearly can look at the charts and all of the materials that we've collectively reviewed and put together, and you can see that Bay Harbor, if you just look at the last 3 columns with regard to maximum floor area, lot coverage, and landscaping, we have no restrictions. So I can see how reasonably you can sort of look at the situation and say, every one of the neighboring communities that we compare ourselves to have at least 1 to 2 restrictions in one of those categories, and they serve to sort of, create some sort of challenge or limitation to design around. We have none. So the concern has always been, candidly, not so much about missing the 1 or 2 bad examples, but legislating against and missing 20 great examples of awesome architecture that you'll never see because we overcorrected. But that said, I think there are things that we could go back and consider and recommend to layer in some additional conservative protection with regard to the size and design of homes, seeing as we have no restriction on floor area, no restriction on lot coverage, no real restriction on landscaping other than, minor number of trees or shrubs or that sort of thing.
Well, we do have restriction on lot coverage.
We have setbacks.
By our setbacks.
Correct.
I mean, they're not, we
But
do
if-
have
if you-
setbacks, which gives it basically 50% lot coverage.
That's correct. And if you look at the setbacks,
I mean, that's not...
but if you look at the setbacks again, and as you know, as I think my board knows, or our board knows, I've been on the fence. I've been sort of not sure how I feel about it.
Stephen, who's the 7? There's 7 of you, right?
Yes.
Who's missing?
Yeah, Judge not able to be with us tonight.
Oh, Jed Frankel.
So, intellectually, I've been sort of on the fence, but I think that we could make recommendations that wouldn't be over restrictive, and I think that the community could be proud of. I don't know that it's going to go all the way towards some of the more extreme positions, and I don't know that it's going to necessarily appease some that say we should do nothing, but I think that council has spoken and would like to see some recommendations on limiting the size of homes, and I think we can come up with something smart
Steve,
around that.
one of the takeaways that I got from observing the meetings was that we want to be fair to the builders. So we want to spell out what we can, right, so that they work with their client and they see what the rules of engagement are. And then at the same time, the board expressed that they want the latitude, right, to look at it and say, no, that's not going to happen. So to me, that's what we need to find here tonight. We need to find the balance between letting them know in advance what the code is and what they can work with so time and money is not wasted, and then giving you the latitude to come in and say that's just not right. And I argued for many years, as you know, before I was on the council, to use, the couple of clauses that are in the code that says you can just say no if it just doesn't look right, if the harmony is not there. So you have that, but as, those of you who have been on the other side presenting your projects, you don't want to follow the rules and then get up to the podium and, other professionals say, no, we don't like it. It doesn't work. So is that kind of correct where we want to balance?
Yes, but I think the sensitivity on this side of the island versus the multifamily side is that we're all collectively more sensitive to what that one homeowner's dream is. And usually, almost always, by definition, the projects that we review on the multifamily side are a developer.
Spec.
And nothing wrong with that, but by definition, it's a spec project. So we are less sensitive to saying, I don't like the way it looks. You know, I think collectively people feel that we've been discerning and sent, you know, great projects back to make a lot of changes, because I don't care, I don't know who the 15 homeowners are later. I'm here trying to protect them. But when it comes in with someone's home, you know, you're a little bit more sensitive to that. But again, I think a lot of the problems were really with spec homes. And I remember my first meeting a couple of years ago, or second, third meeting, I started to realize all the spec homes are the ones that don't have the amount of landscape, are maximized in square footage. And I literally sort of got to the point where I'm trying to find out, is this for a homeowner or is this for someone who's trying to build something to sell? And there's a big difference. But again, I think as we all collectively grow and learn, we become much more discerning about.
And let me tell you, even at the planning and zoning board level, don't think the presenters are 100% honest. You know, because believe me, we've had guys that, you know, when we were the planning and zoning board, come to us and say, oh, you know, I'm building this in a certain way, and I'm going to have my mother-in-law here, and you know, and this, and my kids will play here, and this is, you know, I want all of this. And then, you know, 6 months and 9 months after it was completed, it was for sale, and they sold it.
I think you make a very good point, and candidly, it's fairly obvious where it's intended for someone's, you know, residence. But again, we've really tried to collectively not endorse any specific type of architecture. We just want great design.
Right.
And I think that we can do some things or recommend some things, and it may not be a consensus on the board, but they're you know, when you look at the statistics, you know, it does stand out that we have no other real restrictions other than setbacks.
I think you're right, but let me say one thing, because Kelly hit on something that I wanted to ask you as well, and it goes back to something Wesley had stated earlier. But let me make sure, have you all been under the impression that, I know you're reluctant to actually make a comment or restriction based on the aesthetics of a single-family home, but were you under the impression in any way that if it fit code, if everything was okay with code, then you were essentially supposed to be biased towards allowing code?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So on that same note, and good. On that same note, when it goes back to what Alan stated earlier on, and Bobby as well, you know, I'm of the belief as well that, you know, we don't want to over-legislate here. We don't want to restrict where it's not necessary. We are looking for something that's not going to be imposing on the neighbor, but at the same time, if there is a movement by your board to go forward and try and restrict a little bit more as the aesthetics and the towering aspect of a one home over a neighbor, you know, that does go halfway to the solution, because there have not been a ton of these homes yet, but there is a problem. There are several that have come through. You know, the one we keep on referring back to is the obvious one. But other than that, you know, what we're trying to do here, I think, as an entire board, is to make sure, exactly, we all know the parking garage one is the problem.
We're unanimous on this.
Right, there's no question.
We got to do, you know, whatever we do, we got to do something, sorry for interrupting,
No,
but we got to do something to prevent this from happening.
Right. It's her first view in the morning.
I hope that's not your house.
Oscar has.
Yeah, Oscar has it too.
Can I just say something, since I see this every
This
morning?
view from your front door.
My front door.
Isn't that your front? She took the picture.
So I just think that if maybe, and I don't know, I'm not an
It's
architect.
not my house, huh?
No, I and they happen to be friends of mine, and I love them dearly, but
They used to be friends of mine.
they are friends of mine.
She looks in the camera while saying, I
Um,
love them dearly.
But I think that if there was landscaping and it softened it, I mean, and I don't know, I mean, my big thing to all of these homes are, if there was more landscaping, and if it softened it a little bit, do you think that it would have been a more, palatable, thank you, I'm a little tired today.
You had a tree that blocked the entire front of the house? Absolutely.
You know,
Other
once
than
again,
that-
can I make a comment?
Sure.
Can we give him the microphone?
And I'm not defending the home, I live a couple of houses away. When I saw
You
it
have a
go-
beautiful home,
Thank
by
you.
the way.
When I saw it go up, you know, I was kind of shocked, but it did get unanimous board approval when it came before this board. And once again, architecture is so subjective, and these people that built it, they live in it, it's their home, and I think they had some world-renowned architect come in to design it, and I'm sure in their eyes, it offended me more maybe a few months ago. I'm starting to get used to it. I guess it every day on my way home. You know, some of the gingerbread Mediterraneans I find more offensive. But once again, you know what? Architecture is so subjective. And either side of me, I had Mediterranean homes. One is converted to modern. You know, if that's people's desire, you know, it kind of gives me a little bit of that eclectic look. But if everything's Mediterranean, everything's modern, everything's one story, you know what?
It would be,
Or-
it would be,
no,
it would be
I don't
Miramar.
think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I think we can just wipe that out. Even Steve said it right. So we're not looking at architectural guidelines.
Right.
So you can have that, so we don't have to even worry about that anymore.
No, I'm not looking
You
to,
can have your variety.
And the only comment I want to add to that house or any other house, that house could be half the size. You could chop the 50% on the back, and you would still have the same effect. It would be on the front. It would be imposing. So that's why, in my opinion, just saying we want to limit size, you're not going to prevent that same house being half the length, but still imposing on it.
But also the other things that were discussed, like windows and landscaping.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, landscaping would go a long way,
well, I
Yeah.
have to
and I
tell
don't
you,
think additional
I have to
landscaping.
tell you, at nighttime,
Agreed.
so I don't, at nighttime when this is, so I don't know, it doesn't do it justice, but at nighttime when it's lit up, and it has here, like the bamboo, and it's lit up, I mean, that's what it's supposed to be about. What I object to is just a plain block of cement. And
Yeah.
it's not so much for me how big it is, because like you said, Alan, it could be smaller, and it's just a block of cement for me, and that's just my personal, you know.
By the way-
It's not even cement. They actually put limestone.
No, I know.
They spent a fortune.
I know.
By the way, that if you look at that house as an example, the two things that were sent back were landscaping and uninterrupted runs of unembellished
Right.
concrete and/or facades that don't have any, I call them innies and outies because my architects haven't taught me the right terminology yet. But those are the two things that we sort of attacked first. And the reality is, if you looked at most of the homes, or any of the homes that people tend not to like, they're not well landscaped, and they have large facades of uninterrupted, runs.
Concrete or stone or
So,
whatever.
so we weren't, a lot of thought, a lot of debate went into this. Those things coming forward were not just discussions on that particular home, but a lot of homes. And an increase, I think people would agree, an increase in landscaping is going to protect and not really hurt anyone.
No, nobody's saying that otherwise, but the only problem is landscaping isn't always permanent.
That's
And so
correct.
that's the problem, is you can't make it dependent, that the only way to be acceptable is with landscaping.
Let me tell you
Well,
something.
6
Let me
months, a
tell you
year later,
something.
something dies.
Not only do I agree with you, but if you look at the spec home on 101st, on the south side, it's a large, modern, white spec home. There was litigation and problems, as I am told, with the developer and the owner, because the poor family called me asking how we could help, and I think the town is aware of it. And that home was approved with what looked to me, in my interpretation, of an Ipe wood surrounding on the column to the left of the front door. And what was installed was woody pine, inferior product, not per the approval here. There was litigation issues with the city, with the town, and the developer and the homeowner. Long story short, that was removed. So now there's no wood on that home. So not only on landscaping, but also on some of the design elements that get approved. There's another home that I'm walking around the house, walking around with the dog, looking at a large modern home, which looked a lot nicer when it was approved and built, and now it has some sort of, I don't know what you call
Gold glass.
it, gold glass on the inside of a modern home,
Right.
which has no business in that context. So I don't know how you resolve that, but I agree with you. Landscaping is impermanent, but so are some of the things that we see and approve, and they come in with different materials, and then also not only that, but they're removed. I don't know if that's a,
Well, but it's easier for us to, if there's a, I mean, if there's a code issue on something that repairs, I mean, that's one thing
So,
later on. It's
can you
easier to
give it
do than
Oscar?
a tree
Oscar
dies or
hasn't
someone
had the
removes it.
ability to speak yet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry I came late.
Me too.
But I've heard plenty since I've been here. I tend to feel, and I have expressed it at the board meetings, similar to Jerry. I think that there should be some restrictions. I think that Michael Miller did a great job in his study, and we can see that all the other neighboring islands have some restrictions. I think that some average, analyzing all the other islands and some average referring especially to Bay Harbor, I think we can come up with some restrictions that won't be so overwhelming, that will stop the creativity of the architects. I have a lot of faith on the architects. No matter how many restrictions you throw at them, they're going to turn out a beautiful product. So I think that there should be some restrictions in the lot coverage, in the floor area, and the landscaping, setbacks, and so forth. I agree with Jerry that the rear setback should be somewhat larger. Actually, I think even in the one-story homes, that there should be some restrictions, because I don't want just a perfect one-story cube, straight walls all around and right to the setback line. So I think that we have to think carefully about the restrictions, but I think there should be some. Every time I come into Bay Harbor from the west recently, I really get bothered by the house that's being built right now.
And I mentioned that
next to
one
the
earlier.
bridge.
They're going to love it if the causeway's eventually built next to it.
Yeah.
by the way,
Well-
as a side note, what's interesting about that home, because a couple people mentioned it, is that it's a travesty really, because I remember when that house was approved, and before the storm, you couldn't even see the house coming over the bridge. We looked at elevations, we sent them back, I think. And we looked at, and we had them give us pictures of what it was going to look like coming down the causeway.
They did a rendering?
We sent it, yes, we sent it back, and if you remember, before the storm, that was huge mature vegetation, you wouldn't even see that house. I drove every time now as well, and say the same thing, and I say to myself, oh my God, we made that decision specifically because there was,
Josh's
did.
point about the landscaping is not permanent.
Yeah.
Right.
And they sold us on that there was a huge wall of.
And there was a huge wall of mature trees there that you would
Can
never
I just
see now.
jump in quick? That we would have, that's town landscaping that was damaged in the storm. We're really just waiting for the building to be finished before we take it all out and replace it with the
That's good.
have the same, and
That's
it'll
something
eventually
we have
get
control
hot.
over.
And I think we should actually, it's something that we should maybe put into the code about the landscaping. If something's
Sure.
approved,
Maintaining.
that they maintain it. If there's a storm, they've got to put something back. That's within a certain amount of time. They've got to put it back.
If we could do that and enforce it, I'd be all for it. Whether or not that's doable and the type of plants and everything else, that's the
Can
problem.
I add in just a comment about landscaping?
That could help that.
If there, I'm sorry, Oscar, give me
Wait,
one
excuse me,
second.
1 second, just one thing. Oscar, just be careful because the step behind you, I just don't want you at any point to back up your chair and fall back. Just be aware, okay, sorry.
And then there were 6.
Dealing with, just dealing with landscaping after the hurricane, one thing that happens, it's not like a single event, it hits everybody, and it wipes out even nurseries. So a lot of times you can't instantly replace what you want, or, the same tree that you were going to buy for $5,000 is now $15,000 if you really want it. So that's why it takes a little time to come back and really replace everything as fast as you want it.
Well, I think we need to look at landscaping on the whole island, on the east side too. I mean, I think the new buildings and the hotels need to also look at their landscaping.
I think one thing that could help that house might be to plant a lot of bamboo very tall.
It's not a bad idea, it grows quickly. Let me ask you, just out of curiosity, because I don't remember anything, when they were going in front of, did anybody even mention with that house the fact that there might eventually be a causeway right up against their side window? Nobody, okay. I'm just, it's going to be interesting. No, because...
One day the bridge is going to have to be
Yeah.
replaced, and it's not going to be in the exact
It's-
same position that it's in now.
It's going to be right up, I don't
They
think...
tried to buy the property next to
No,
it,
that,
and
no,
we said no.
that was the
One more-
other time they tried to, they
I
sold
want
it.
to add on Steve's point that we were able to agree on the landscaping and interrupting long concrete facades. And the way many great companies launch products, they do it in like a lead manner. They bring something out, they test it, they get feedback, and it's a constant loop. I think we've been discussing this for many weeks, and this is an area that we were able to agree. So if we can pass at least this first step legislation, it doesn't mean we're going to stop and don't revisit further legislation. It's a first start, then we can get houses to the board, we can see what they're bringing to us, and then we can continue iterating. We don't have to have a perfect bulletproof legislation that's going to take years or months to discuss, when we can put something out and then start getting feedback from the new plans that come.
Agreed.
I agree.
Can I, Steve, before you go on, 1 second, please, Oscar. Typically, I know this is kind of an unusual question, but historically at the Planning and Zoning Board meetings, does Jed's vote line up with more like Jerry's vote or Alan's vote? Or does it vary?
I mean, if I may, I don't think that there's necessarily that he follows or he goes, that his vote aligns with one or the other. I happened to, not our last meeting, but the one before, I happened to ask at the end of our meeting, would anybody, just as a sort of a straw vote, how do you guys feel about lot coverage and building size?
Right.
And he thought that there should be some limits.
Okay.
On those. We didn't discuss what those limits were, but he was one of the three.
I think he's sort of, I think he's probably more the middle of the road, right? And look, I think I don't mean to cut it off at all, we can debate it out for sure, but I think from our perspective, what we wanted to come to and talk about was just to be together, talk about the past, talk about what we put forth, why we did that, and get the consensus from the board, which I think you've spoken, which is you'd like to see some recommendations, maybe not extreme recommendations, but it sounds like the board is wanting to see some limitations on lot coverage, lot size, setback changes, or something. So I think we should.
And square footage.
And or square footage. I think we need to go back and talk through and make those recommendations. I don't think it's going to be, a consensus, but that's okay, and we'll get there.
Okay, I think we should allow some of the audience who hasn't had an opportunity to talk. Kathleen Kennedy.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Kennedy. I live at the Bay Rock, 90. Where do I live? Bay Rock. Thank you. I know you're going to. Somebody just brought me up to date that you're going to address the East Island sometime. But you know what? 80% of the residents 80% of the residents live in the east side. And I don't understand why the west side is getting such preference in this meeting here tonight. We lost the most precious trees on the east side. The Wyndham Hotel has the most skimpiest landscaping I have ever seen, thanks to all of you guys, especially you old-timers, Oscar and Mr. Gorovitz. I came up here many times, and so did some of my colleagues, asking for landscaping for developers to put beautiful flowers, trees, everything to replace the beautiful trees that were knocked down, and that hasn't happened. So I know the west side is very rich, but you know what? We are rich in our hearts on the east side, and we want landscaping, we want beautiful trees, and we want to hear the birds singing. Remember that theme, Mr. Gorovitz? The birds singing in the trees? I'm still waiting for them trees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before you go on, I just want to say one thing. You know, Frank, going on that point, I want to see what is possible, because we did have this conversation slightly for just a few moments during the last council meeting, at least some point during the last council meeting. One of the things we talked about, if you remember, Ron, the issue was when the original plans for both the hotels came up, and there was this discussion about landscaping. They had shown plans that were no palm trees, and you were even adamant about it. We all agreed, no palm trees. And all the designs had these other, the more lush things that were coverage and everything else. And they kept saying there won't be palm trees. You go over there now, it's palm trees. And we all knew that was going to come down the pike. So the question goes down to Frank now, what can we do? I mean, landscaping is difficult to manage, and we understand that.
Josh?
But
just so you know, the palm trees that are on West Bay Harbor Drive are removed.
No, he's talking about East Bay Harbor.
Yeah, east, and they're still out there. Yeah, they're around the hotels. They're there. So my question becomes, what can we do for it's East Island, it's West Island, all the way around, for purposes of planning and approving a project to maintain at least they have some. It may not, obviously, you can't legislate that they have the exact, this tree is exactly the same height, because you can't always get two trees alike. But what can we do to try and get somewhere close to that?
We can enforce site plans. Site plans have landscaping plans that have various items. We've enforced those on many occasions. We've required folks to do things the way we wanted the first time, and we're in the process of doing that in one particular home that I can think of now. We've done 2 or 3 other homes in the past, and look, the East Island and the West Island are treated alike as far as all site plan approvals, including but not limited to the landscaping plan. So I'm more than happy to look at that and address it.
Okay, if you can look back at the site plan that was approved for the hotels, that'd be approved.
What about the hotels? Because with the hotel is, and I drive by the Wyndham, and I drive by both hotels, and their landscaping
is different from what we were
different
sold.
than what we were sold, because I remember sitting up here and they told us and they showed us these very luscious landscaping designs, and what's out there is not what they showed us on the boards or anything else. So who's going to take responsibility for it? And
Can I make
who's...
one suggestion about...
Pass him the mic. Pass him the mic down.
Yes, please.
Mayor, can I quickly, on the hotel, the Wyndham, they came in for their TCO. We inspected it, my office, and Patrick assisted as well. We've cited them for very short vegetation. It doesn't match the plan. And, it's always a game. This is how it works in the deep real world. The inspector goes out, the plants are this big, and the approved plan says that those shrubs and the trees are supposed to be this big, and they plant something this big. So they are cited right now. They will not get a CO until they replace the trees.
Well, it's not just the size, but it's not just the size, it's the type of plants which are
right.
key.
Well, we have the approved plan.
But they are
No, they have a temporary right now.
So can we make them have mature, can we say, are we allowed to say we want mature plants? I don't know.
We often ask at the board, specifically on the landscape plan, to have them represent to us the level of maturity at install.
Can we...
And I do feel that a lot of times what gets delivered is inferior. The Ivory is a good example as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that what is in front of the Ivory, which is a brand new building, is what this or any board approved. There's just no way.
Well, if I can speak just quickly on that. A lot of the plans, we have a master street plan, street tree plan and so forth.
was, the anticipation was that the perimeter overhead power lines was going to be buried. If you remember, the code still says that when you redevelop, you put the line underground. FPL came to us and said, we're not letting anybody bury the line unless you do a big segment because we're having, service problems. So the plans gets approved, has these big trees in the front yard, but you can't plant those under the power line. So
But then they should have, first of all, with all due respect,
I'm just explaining what happened.
I know, but with all due respect, they know, and we know, and they know that that's not, and when they came before us, those two hotels, and what they showed us, okay, was totally different than what's out there.
Agreed.
And you know what, this town deserves better than what they got. There's no excuse for what they gave us. What they gave us is 99-cent, plants that you can go to Home Depot and buy, and we deserve better than that.
I think Bobby wants to say something, but let me say one
Sorry.
last thing. Just remember the temporary CO, the key word there is temporary. It doesn't have to become permanent.
My only suggestion with landscaping, and I build a lot of developments, and what holds up best in a storm, and when I got very expensive trees at my house. I left for the storm, when I came back I was shot, every palm tree alive and well. Clusia hedge totally blown over. My property is in South Dade, all the great oaks and different types of trees we plant, destroyed. A fortune in cleanup, this town had a fortune in cleanup. So what I would only suggest is I think somebody should look into when storms do happen, what kind of trees are going to survive the storms, what kind of trees are not going to destroy our power lines when they do come down, and things of that type. And we look at sustainable landscaping also. You know what? Water's precious. We talk about different things, and I'm like on the fence on, big grass. I live on the bay and my backyard gets destroyed. And why don't you put in the artificial? And I've been resistant, getting ready to resod for a second time. I re-landscaped my house probably 3 times already. I'm a bit of a nut, but I think the town should look at sustainable landscaping. I know what my water bill is a month, that's watering the yard, what I spend. And, it's a fortune. So, just think some of the things should be looked into that would be beneficial to the town, the community, in case of a storm, and things like that. And that should be for discussion.
Thank you. John Bett, if you could please come forward.
John Bett.
Oh, I'd like to finish.
When you're done, he's not protesting.
I don't want to talk about landscaping.
Jim, just put your name and address, I'm sorry.
Okay, John Vetter, 10350 West Bay Harbor Drive, apartment 10H, Bay Harbor Islands, Florida, 33154. Yeah, no landscaping, but I believe in no infringement of architectural freedom. Otherwise, there would have been no Frank Lloyd Wright or Houseman, or that's the only architects I know.
Good enough.
Good ones.
And this is the first time I've heard anything other than, well, it's private property, they can do whatever they want. That's usually the answer I get from the town officials when I bring up something about the East Island here. I'd like to see, before the plans get to the board, some additional kind of scrutiny on practical things, like how big the delivery entrance is for the Grand Beach Hotel. You end up with 2 Coca-Cola trucks stacked out in front, and then the linen truck parked on the street today. And neighbors can come to the board meetings and they can appeal them if they don't like what they're seeing there. I've done that. Just want to remind everybody, meeting code is a necessary but not sufficient condition for approval. Approval by this board here necessarily means there must be harmony between current and planned structures in the neighborhood. And we talked about, there's some talk about restricting sizes on single lots. Tonight we have some single lot projects that are huge on this island. And I believe that sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. same thing should apply. Same considerations should apply here. 6, 5, 4. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Mayor Lindsay Silver.
Twelve 95th Street, West Island. Also, I served on the planning and zoning for 8 years. I own a design firm for over 50 years. We used to have a code for landscaping that had to be turned in before approval of the building. Unless the landscaping design was approved, building did not start. And when the building was finished, that landscaping had to be as the design said before they were allowed to utilize the building. I think maybe we should stick to what we always had. Thank you.
Amen. Paul Basil.
I won't be long. Paul Basil, 9240 West Bay Harbor Drive. Thanks everybody for coming because I know it's all volunteer. I go to a lot of planning and zoning and it's all subjective. I mean, the Eiffel Tower, everybody hated it and now they like it. So we don't know. It's kind of like we're in the awkward age. Our feet are too big and our face is breaking out, but hopefully when the plants grow, it'll look better. My point for tonight was these guys do a lot of intense looking at the building and the angles and the windows. And I asked one time if they can go inside the building because the floor plans that a lot of developers present, and people have said that planning and zoning can't really determine that, but now that the buildings, some of them are up, and you go inside and the bathroom opens to the kitchen sink, and you can't fit more than a double, twin bed in the master bedroom and the angles. So is it possible to have legislation that you guys get the opportunity to critique the floor plans?
We do.
But, well, one of you told me that the floor plans aren't considered, and you're not allowed to determine...
They're not. I mean, the planning and zoning directive is aesthetics from the outside, from all angles. As you've heard, we often make comments, but this board is not tasked with commenting on whether or not a interior unit is marketable and the layouts and configurations, although we do. But our approvals are generally not based upon that, no.
No, I mean, I'd like to enlarge that viewpoint. I mean, allow you guys to do, I mean, obviously, approval is one thing, but increasing the amount of comments, because I can see it, plenty of units, I've talked to plenty of people that are having problems selling units, which means the city is left with open units and have further problem, because the designs themselves, interior, you're absolutely right, Paul, are horrendous. And there's not going to be a situation where people are going to be buying them, and then eventually they'll end up as Airbnb, and we've got a larger problem. So I love the idea of having you guys comment more as far as the design interior. I know it's a little bit more work, and you guys are already...
Yeah, it's more subjectivity, but...
But at the same time, yeah, allowing you guys to legislate whether or not someone is going to do it is a different story, but the comments would be something helpful, I think.
Is the question about the size, bedroom sizes, unit sizes, is it something that could reasonably be legislated?
That's a good question, yeah, I don't know.
Or is it something that you're, asking architects and others to comment on what they think of an interior layout? It's just not something that not only this board, but I don't know of many boards who...
Well, we can legislate as far as the size of rooms, because we can deal with TDRs and stuff, it allows us to do that.
The height.
Which we've already done. We increased the minimum.
Right.
But before
So
a
that could be something that...
Right, we've already done that.
Before a project reaches the planning and zoning board, doesn't it go through DRC review? And
Yes, it does.
yeah, so you guys, I
No,
mean,
he's talking about multifamily, a single family.
No,
multifamily.
You're talking about multifamily.
Yeah, right, in East Island,
No, but the
and I
problem
know
is-
that's not tonight's
Right, no,
topic.
but it's a good point, but here's the problem, is that, design's looking at, they're looking at overall, okay, it's got a bedroom here, it's got a bedroom there. it's difficult for anybody sitting there to try and determine, well, whether or not this part's marketable. And I don't want them to go out to that portion of marketability, but there are times, I mean, I can tell you right now, and there's some obvious statement things. I mean, I've had people show me units after they've been built, and you're going into $1 million, these are, you know, the multifamily, $1 million units, and you walk into the restroom and you realize anybody who walks in to the master bathroom is going to smack whoever else is on the toilet or anything else right in the knee. And it's a huge bathroom, but the design has essentially a toilet right behind a door, the only door to the restroom. So obviously the design made out no sense. And you're going to see that unit after unit after unit. There are other units people have brought me into just to show me that it was poor design in Bay Harbor, where you got,
and there's
I walked
one-
into one unit, I said, what is this? It looks like a medical waiting room.
Right.
And they said, oh, that's just an extra room. I said, but it looks, I mean, there's just a narrow little strip with, and then first thing you see when you walk into the unit is a washer dryer. I said, that doesn't make sense.
I don't know if planning and zoning could be given the opportunity to say to the developer, instead of having 3 doors here, can you make that one a pocket door? Or there's a particular building where the 1, 2, and 3 line don't make any sense. The 4, 5, and 6 are beautiful. So
Paul, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is your opinion with regard to parking and lifts and marketability and how the market is receiving that? Parking.
Whether people want a lift?
I don't think that's on the scope of our agenda.
Just curious. I
at
was
the
just
moment.
curious because he's...
What if a buyer would rather not have a lift? But
Of course, but...
what's the question? I didn't. Yeah, okay. No, that's
We're not in the scope.
receiving.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole nother.
We're talking about West Island right now.
Right, we're talking
East
about-
Island
Right.
is
So,
separate.
My request as a resident in 30 seconds would be to give these guys even more opportunity to look at the floor plan, because they look at very detailed exterior.
I think that would be really difficult. I think that,
Well, if you see a blatant flare where, like the kitchen lip, I'm not going to name buildings, but they just don't make sense, and I don't know if it's
I agree. I
possible.
mean, we've
Maybe it's
seen-
not
we've seen
possible.
Quite a few, actually. We saw one a couple of weeks ago, the last meeting, that some of the units were, seemed to me at least a little screwy, but
I don't think
I
we
think
can
it's very difficult
legislate
to try to...
how an interior of a,
No, but they can suggest.
Well, the
we can
bigger,
suggest.
the bigger risk,
Do it tonight.
No,
bigger
not
risk-
tonight,
No,
not tonight. I just put it out there.
the bigger risk is that, you know, through value engineering and the development of a project, through reviewing codes and massaging, is that if we approve something, we expect to see it built that way. And if we approve an interior layout, and then through the process, the evolution of the process, sizing of plumbing walls that starts to massage and evolve, where's that red line, right? Where it's, what we approved is not what
It's
you're
going to
built.
come back 1,000 times.
Yeah, it would be it's very trivial, but I do
All right, that's
agree-
fine.
I do agree that we can do a better job of trying to point some of the things out that are glaring and...
But it's hard for you guys to do your job when it gets value engineering changed, like the AstroTurf and stuff like that. But anyway, thanks for your efforts. I respect what you do. Thanks a lot.
Okay, guys, I think we're gonna get off the multifamily for a little while, but that is something, you know, it is something for us to bring back a different night to start discussing, because I think it is something important for us.
I think we need to have a workshop on that, just like we did, the same kind of procedure as soon as
Agreed.
possible.
Absolutely agree, absolutely agree.
And everything, so
So we'll
people
start
can
working on
know.
that.
Is there more public comment, or can I comment on
I
something?
think that's the end of the public comment.
And this hopefully may be in summary, but, you know, a lot of the conversation is, there's been a lot of moving parts, but there's also been a lot of consensus. I've sort of been keeping tally. And I think everybody on the board, on both sides, can come to consensus on the landscaping issue. One of the things that Michael Miller's studio or office did that's really helpful is in this document here, page 17 and 18, he took, I think it's 7 homes that were recently approved or presented before us, and kind of dissected it into the different categories. And what's really helpful about this is if we were to throw out an arbitrary number, let's say we want, I don't know, 35% pervious, minimum pervious surface requirement, well, almost all of these homes meet that. Or, for example, if you were to consider building coverage, and you were to say, let's say 40% maximum building coverage, well, every one of these homes meets that. So I think this is a useful tool when you are looking for what's the right number and what's the right, you know, language to introduce, to realize that, okay, a lot of these homes that we're approving, this isn't like a huge hardship that we're placing. This is something that could be approvable, right?
Right, I think that's on the right track. We want you, I mean, tell me if anybody else feels otherwise. We're trying to get to a scenario where you leave the architect as much leeway as possible, let them design as needed to be designed, without too many restrictions, but at the same time, just simply not having it end up so that it dwarfs the neighbor. And that's all it comes down to, so that we don't have the flat walls and we don't have something towering over.
Can you let Oscar finish? He never got to finish his. Did you finish all of your comments? I wanted to give you the opportunity to finish if I interrupted you.
No, I basically wanted to summarize that I think that the purpose of this should be to give the architects, the owners, and the developers guidelines that ahead of time they know what we will be looking for, and they don't have to guess and come to the full presentation and they get rejected because it didn't meet our aesthetic desires. So I think there should be some definite guidelines, and that way we can go from there and they bring their project and then we can approve it or not approve it or give them other additional requirements, but at least they have some basic guidelines that they can follow.
Thank you so much.
Now, I just have one comment that I see we have in this town, which, what is a half story? We have 2.5 stories. What does that mean?
I have no.
Is that allowed?
I know what it means.
Rooftop deck?
I think
Linda wants... Dr. Whittle's house, that's 2.5 stories. I think it was invented with Dr. Whittle's house. Yeah, it's kind of like just a design feature that was on the top.
My house is 1.5 stories, so I'll explain that. First of all, right, it's a split level, but it's considered 1.5 stories.
Mr. Meyer, please.
Because half over the garage, which is the upstairs bedroom, is really not a complete second story. But it is, as far as I'm concerned, but for everyone else, it's the height of the house is 1.5 stories.
Thank you.
But I think in the newer homes, it might relate, maybe Mr. Miller or somebody official can answer that. That it's like the
He has a
Well, you also have the double house, the tennis court
observatory.
that has the...
Well, I assume it's coming into play if somebody's got a pitch roof where you have additional height, where you...
You can look
A
out.
split level, maybe?
He looks out. He has like
Well, you have like the one, you have the one,
We don't look out to the...
I'm not even there.
I've been there.
But I'm saying on 101st type of
The camera.
Let's go back to the,
tennis
Yeah,
court.
yes.
They have the little like lookout right
Look
top.
out.
Yeah,
try to finish this up and not have this
I think,
cross conversation.
touching on what Oscar just said, and Kelly, you made the point, I think we can't leave it open for someone to come in and think that they can build more than what we as a board will try to limit them to. I think if we give them some restrictions on size, it's fair to someone, more fair to either a buyer of a property into Bay Harbor or the architect, not relying on us as a board to say, no, this is not compatible for the neighborhood. There's got to be some limits on it.
So I think what we should do is obviously we all agree on the landscaping. So what we're looking for is for you, the board, to go back and tell me if I'm right and come up with some percentages and come back to us with what you think are some guidelines of which you would like to see and bring it back to us so that we can then legislate what we... Yes,
no...
Kelly.
I'm sorry. Oh, you're not done? I thought you were done.
But go ahead.
Finish, Stephanie.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say that I actually went to their meetings, and they've kind of done that already, I think, to keep sending them back.
I would like it in writing so that we all could see
Well,
it.
what I propose to add to what you're saying is maybe take a list of the things that were mentioned here, like one suggestion was lot coverage 35% or 40% with some other structures. The things that were kind of mentioned, and we're not saying that we're voting on that in agreement, but just to put them on a list so that at our next council meeting, we can go ahead. personally, I think they've talked about it enough. I mean, you guys,
Are they all in agreement on that?
Well, they're
I don't
not,
think
no,
we
they're
have
not
any-
all in
They're not
agreement.
on
They're
all
not.
in
I don't think,
agreement.
again, I don't think we're going to have consensus, but
No,
I think
that's
at
right.
our
No, no,
last...
yeah,
at our-
Stephen, I think you're using, sorry for interrupting, but you're using the wrong word. I think unanimity is what you're saying.
Right,
But I think a consensus is just kind of like the majority of you
right.
guys.
And that's what I'm looking
Fair
for.
point.
I think that, can I just say, I went to some of your 2 or 3 year meetings, I guess. When you had, your discussion went to a certain point and you made some recommendations to us, but the intent was always that these 2 bodies would meet, like we are tonight, and so that there'd be some conversation and additional feedback, and then you'll
Right.
come back to us.
Right.
Again, that's all.
I feel that and I'm sorry that the process is slow. It's unwieldy sometimes, 2 boards trying to communicate, and we're trying to do the best, whatever job you want us to do. I feel comfortable that we have the feedback that we need. Give us 1 more meeting, and we will
Yeah.
come back with written recommendations of
Yes.
some alternatives for you all to discuss and debate.
Is Steve?
I think the suggestion, sorry.
No.
I think that the suggestion that I would like to make is, we've had this opportunity to talk. You guys, I don't know if you'll have time tonight to talk about it. If you need an additional meeting, then great. But if not, then I have my notes from all the suggestions that you guys had. I really want to thank you so much for your time and all the meetings and efforts you put into this. But as far as I'm concerned, whatever the next meeting is that they're able to do this at, we have our meeting then, and we go ahead and make our decisions. And that's it. Then we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to move on from it. And that's kind of how
I
I
also,
see it.
I hear a lot of urgency. I don't know what's the rush to, I think, debating and trying to come to an agreement and presenting a solution, getting opinions, that's how we make things better. I don't think this is a decision that should be rushed and be like, okay, next meeting, bring whatever. Maybe it takes us 2 or 3 more meetings to come to the number we want to present, because this, I think, deserves the time. And I don't know if it's possible, but how can we also get the input from the residents of the town, and see what's the majority of the town thinks on this issue? Because I would like to know what the people that live in the island think on
Let's hope reality. You know what? We're seeing maybe 6 homes a year. How many homes do we see a year? 6 tops, new homes? Maybe 3 renovations? I don't think.
Yeah, it's not that many.
It's not a
whole
ton.
lot. I think
No, it's
it's
not
a
a
half dozen a
ton.
year we're
Well,
talking about. So it's not like this island's getting developed
Right.
tomorrow. And
Can I just respond
something's
quickly
broken.
to Alan?
Very coming in front of us.
This was a meeting that was publicized for, this is a public meeting. Unfortunately, the troops didn't really rally to come and participate in the meeting, but this was publicized. I think it was in our newsletter. I think we talked about it in social media. We talked about it. We mentioned this for already, I think, 2 of our previous meetings. So this is the public response.
Not to mention too, so I have small children, so it happens to be that I'm out in the neighborhoods a lot. I can guarantee you that there are maybe a handful of things that I am consistently spoken to about that people want to take time on, and this is definitely one of them, whether it's the East Island or the West Island. They want to know what's going on, and they have concerns about it, and everybody has an opinion about it. So to me, there also comes, there's an economic equation in this too, right? The longer that we talk about it, like at some point we need to just pull the trigger and make certain decisions. And I think that your time is precious, right? And we want to give you guys the tools that you need so that you can go ahead and within the creativity that you have and within the projects that you have, bring great architecture and great development to Bay Harbor Island. But I think it's our responsibility at a certain point to give you what you need to go ahead and do that. So I think for me personally, we're getting to that point where we need to make a decision.
Let me add one more thing also, Stephen. In addition to the recommendations as far as numbers and percentages, if there's anything, I'd like your discussion also to include, if there's anything else that you believe that the board needs a little more leeway on, please let us know. That's something else, because if you come back and say you would like to have the ability to do X, Y, Z, that's something we can discuss, but it's best coming from you that you want it.
Yeah. I just want to make a mention. In regards to the landscaping, I definitely don't want to lose the point in regards to maintaining the landscaping. If that's something that is either done on Michael's side or done more on Frank's side, but legislating the maintaining of the landscaping, I think that's kind of, that's a big part of it. And I also don't want to lose sight in regards to what was mentioned in regards to sustainable landscaping. I'm actually very interested in knowing what other cities can do in regards to that. If there's a way perhaps of maybe providing some level of incentives to get people to push into that's really important. It's really nice to say, well, we support it, but if no one does it, then we weren't successful. I'd like to see more sustainable landscaping. And if there's a way we can make that happen through kind of, incentivizing it, I would be in favor of looking at that too.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for coming. We look forward to our report as fast or as much time as you need, hopefully sooner than later. And we are moved to...
Second.
Second? All those, thank you.
Nice.
You guys, they have a meeting now, right?